He entered the confessional, but the man behind the screen wasn't God's servant. It was the Mafia king he'd sinned against 23 years ago. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. Father Vincent Hayes hadn't slept through the night in 6 months. The insomnia had started as whispers, fleeting images that dissolved when he opened his eyes. A woman's scream. The weight of a baby in his trembling arms. Rain lashing against a car window as he drove through darkness, breaking every vow he'd ever made. But lately, the whispers had become shouts, jolting him awake at 3 a.m. with his heart hammering against his ribs and sweat soaking through his clerical collar. Tonight was no different. He sat in the small office behind St. Augustine's altar, the flickering votive candles casting shadows that danced like accusers across the walls. His Bible lay open on the desk, Psalm 32, a passage about confession and forgiveness, but the words blurred before his eyes. At 51, Vincent had spent 3 decades serving God in Harlem, baptizing babies, burying elders, counseling the broken. He was beloved, trusted, a pillar of faith in a neighborhood that desperately needed one. He was also a liar. Vincent's dark fingers traced the rim of his cold coffee cup. Through the office window, he could see the empty pews of the sanctuary, each one a silent witness to the thousands of confessions he'd heard over the years. Adultery, theft, violence. He'd absolved them all with practiced compassion, never revealing the poisonous secret that festered in his own soul. 23 years, he thought, closing his eyes. 23 years of running from the truth. The baby's cry still echoed in his memory, high and piercing, cutting through the storm. He'd been 28 then, fresh from seminary, assigned to a small parish in Brooklyn. He wasn't supposed to be working that night. Wasn't supposed to answer the rectory door when Sienna Vitoli appeared, bleeding and desperate, her 5-month-old daughter clutched against her chest. "Please," she'd begged, her beautiful dark face streaked with tears and bruises. "Please, Father. He'll kill us both." Vincent pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to banish the memory. But it clung to him like smoke, choking him with guilt that prayer could no longer ease. He'd made a choice that night, one that haunted every homily he preached about truth and righteousness. He'd chosen to protect an innocent woman and child over honoring the bonds of family. He'd chosen to play God. And tomorrow, he would finally pay for it. His phone buzzed on the desk. A single text message from an unknown number. St. Patrick's. 9 p.m. Come alone. Vincent's breath caught. He'd sent out careful inquiries through the neighborhood's underground network, dropped hints in confession booths, whispered questions to former gang members who'd found redemption in his church. It had taken 3 months to get word to the right people, and another 2 months of agonizing silence before this response. Lorenzo Vitoli would see him. The name alone made Vincent's hands shake. The Vitoli family controlled everything from the docks of Red Hook to the penthouses of Manhattan. Drugs, weapons, politicians. Lorenzo's empire was built on blood and fear. The newspapers called him the architect because of how meticulously he constructed his criminal operations, leaving no trace, no witnesses. In 23 years of ruthless expansion, he'd never been arrested, never been touched. And Vincent had stolen his daughter. Not stolen, he corrected himself, even as shame burned in his throat. Saved. I saved her. But God wasn't buying that excuse anymore. Neither was Vincent's conscience. He stood, his knees protesting after hours of kneeling in prayer. At 51, he felt ancient, his close-cropped hair more gray than black, his broad shoulders stooped from carrying invisible weight. He moved through the darkened church, his footsteps echoing off stone floors worn smooth by a century of faithful feet. In the sacristy, he paused before the mirror. The man staring back looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, haunted, nothing like the confident young seminarian who'd once believed that faith could conquer any moral dilemma. That Vincent Hayes had been certain of right and wrong, of God's will and man's duty. This Vincent Hayes knew only doubt. He touched the small silver cross at his throat, a gift from his mother when he'd taken his final vows. "The truth will set you free," she'd whispered, quoting scripture as she clasped it around his neck. He wondered what she'd think of him now, preparing to confess to a murderer instead of to God. The walk back to his office felt like a condemned man's final mile. Vincent pulled out a locked drawer in his desk and removed a yellowed envelope, the only physical evidence of that night 23 years ago. Inside was a single photograph, Sienna Vitoli, radiant despite the fear in her eyes, holding a baby girl with soft curls and her mother's gentle smile. On the back, in Sienna's elegant handwriting, her name is Amora. Tell her I loved her enough to let her go. Sienna had died 4 years after that night. Cancer, the obituary said, though Vincent suspected the years of running and hiding had worn her down to nothing. She'd made him promise to keep Amora's location secret until the girl turned 25, old enough to decide for herself whether to seek out the truth about her father. Amora turned 25 last month. And Vincent could no longer bear the weight of his deception. He slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket, turned off the office light, and walked out into the Harlem night. The streets were alive with summer heat and the sounds of survival, laughter spilling from corner bodegas, music thumping from passing cars, the wail of distant sirens. This was his world, his flock, his redemption for past sins. After tomorrow, he might never see it again. St. Patrick's Cathedral loomed in the distance, its Gothic spires piercing the Manhattan skyline like accusing fingers pointed at heaven. Vincent flagged down a taxi, his heart pounding a rhythm of terror and strange, desperate relief. He was finally going to tell the truth. Even if the truth killed him. St. Patrick's Cathedral was supposed to be a sanctuary. But as Father Vincent climbed the stone steps at 8:47 p.m., the Gothic masterpiece felt more like a mausoleum, cold, vast, and filled with the ghosts of unanswered prayers. The bronze door stood open despite the late hour, swallowing him into darkness barely touched by the flicker of prayer candles. His footsteps echoed through the empty nave. The cathedral could hold 2,500 people, but tonight it held only shadows and silence. Vincent's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the soaring columns, the stained glass windows rendered black by nightfall, the rows of empty pews stretching toward an altar draped in white linen. And there, in the third pew from the front, sat a man who'd never knelt before God in his life. Lorenzo Vitoli. Even in the dim light, his presence was unmistakable. He sat perfectly still, one arm draped across the back of the pew, his tailored charcoal suit fitting him like armor. His profile was sharp, Roman nose, strong jaw, silver threading through dark hair slicked back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble. At 49, he looked like a Renaissance prince who'd wandered into the wrong century, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Vincent's feet wanted to run. His faith demanded he walk forward. He chose faith. Mr. Vitoli, Vincent said quietly, stopping at the end of the pew. Lorenzo didn't turn. His pale eyes, winter sky blue, cold and calculating, remained fixed on the crucifix above the altar. Father Vincent Hayes. His voice was smooth, cultured, with the barest trace of his grandfather's Sicilian accent. You've been looking for me. Persistently. Foolishly. Yes. Do you know what happens to people who seek me out? Lorenzo's fingers drummed once against the wooden pew, a sound like a judge's gavel. They usually want something. Money. Protection. Mercy. He finally turned his head, and the weight of his gaze nearly buckled Vincent's knees. Which do you want, Father? None of those. Vincent's throat was desert dry. I need to confess. Something flickered across Lorenzo's face. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. You're a priest. I believe you have other avenues for that. Not to God. Vincent forced himself to meet those icy eyes. To you. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Somewhere in the cathedral's heights, a draft moaned through hidden spaces. A prayer candle guttered and died. Lorenzo stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. He was tall, 6'2" to Vincent's 5'11", and he used every inch of that height as he stepped into the aisle, closing the distance between them. Vincent caught the scent of expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Gunpowder. Maybe. Or blood. You want to confess to me? Lorenzo's tone suggested he was testing the words, finding them absurd. A man of God wants to bare his soul to the devil. I want to bare my soul to a father who lost his daughter. The change was instant. Lorenzo's hand shot out, fisting in Vincent's collar, yanking him forward so violently that Vincent stumbled. Their faces were inches apart now, and the coldness in Lorenzo's eyes had ignited into something feral and burning. Choose your next words very carefully, priest, Lorenzo whispered, his voice dropping to a register that promised violence. Because they may be your last. Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs, but he didn't pull away. This was the moment. The precipice. 23 years of running had led him here, to this breath, this choice, this truth. 23 years ago, Vincent said, his voice shaking but steady, your wife Sienna came to my rectory in Brooklyn. She was bleeding. Terrified. She had a baby in her arms, 5 months old, with your eyes and her mother's smile. He watched Lorenzo's face pale. She begged me to help her disappear. And I did. Lorenzo's grip tightened, choking off Vincent's air. You're lying. Her name was Amora, Vincent gasped. Sienna named her Amora Vitoli. She had a birthmark, a small crescent moon on her left shoulder blade. She. Lorenzo slammed him against a column, the impact driving the air from Vincent's lungs. The Mafia King's face was inches away, twisted with something between rage and anguish. Sienna died in childbirth. The baby died with her. I buried them both. You buried empty caskets. Vincent's vision swam, but he pushed on, driven by 23 years of silence. Sienna survived. She ran because she knew what you were becoming, what your world would do to an innocent child. She came to me because she had nowhere else to go, and his voice cracked. I helped her vanish. I gave her money, documents, a car. I drove them to the Pennsylvania border and watched them disappear into the night. Liar. Lorenzo's roar echoed through the cathedral, bouncing off stone and stained glass. But his hands were shaking now, and his eyes, those merciless, calculating eyes, glistened with something that might have been tears. I mourned them. For 23 years, I've carried their deaths like stones in my chest. You expect me to believe. I have proof. Vincent reached slowly into his jacket, half expecting to be shot before his fingers found the envelope. Lorenzo watched him with the coiled tension of a predator, but he didn't strike. Vincent pulled out the photograph with trembling hands. Sienna sent this to me 6 months after she left, Vincent said quietly. Before she made me promise to never contact her again. Before she disappeared completely, even from me. Lorenzo snatched the photograph, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. In the candlelight, Vincent watched the Mafia King's face crack open, every wall, every carefully constructed mask of control, shattering as he stared at the image of his wife and daughter. Sienna, Lorenzo breathed, and the name was a prayer, a curse, a broken hymn. His fingers traced the edges of the photograph as if he could reach through time and touch her face. She's alive. They're alive. Sienna passed away 4 years ago, Vincent said gently, the words like knives in his own throat. Cancer. But Amora. Where? Lorenzo's voice was raw, stripped of all sophistication. He looked up from the photograph, and Vincent saw the man beneath the monster, a husband who'd lost everything, a father who'd mourned a child who'd never died. Where is my daughter? This was the moment Vincent had prayed about for 6 months. The question that had kept him awake, driven him to the edge of his sanity. Because answering it meant betraying Sienna's final wish. It meant potentially delivering an innocent woman into the hands of a killer. But it also meant finally, telling the truth. She doesn't know who you are, Vincent said. Sienna raised her under different name, far from your world. She's safe. Successful. Good. He took a shaking breath. And she deserves to know where she came from. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, his grief hardening back into the steel that had built an empire. You're going to tell me where she is. Now. Yes, Vincent said simply. That's why I'm here. But first, you need to understand something, Lorenzo. He straightened despite the pain in his back, meeting the Mafia King's gaze with a courage born of desperation. I didn't steal your daughter. I saved her from becoming a monster's child. From growing up surrounded by blood and fear. From becoming like me. Lorenzo's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. You think you're a hero, priest? You think kidnapping my child, letting me believe they were dead, torturing me with grief for 2 decades, you think that makes you righteous? No, Vincent whispered. I think it makes me a sinner. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm confessing to you instead of hiding behind my collar and my vows. His voice broke. I broke every promise I made to God that night. I've lived with the weight of it crushing me for 23 years. And I can't carry it anymore. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorenzo stared at him, the photograph clutched in his white-knuckled fist, his chest heaving with barely contained emotion. Vincent could see the war raging behind those pale eyes, fury battling hope, the need for vengeance wrestling with a desperate hunger for family. Finally, Lorenzo spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you right now and tear this city apart until I find her myself." Vincent had prepared for this question, had rehearsed 1,000 theological arguments about mercy and redemption. But standing here, facing the man whose life he'd shattered, only one truth remained. "Because she has your wife's smile," Vincent said softly, "and if you find her covered in my blood, you'll lose her before you ever get her back." Lorenzo's hand moved to his jacket, to the gun Vincent knew was holstered there. The Mafia King's face was unreadable, carved from stone and rage and grief. And then, slowly, his hand fell away. "Tell me," Lorenzo commanded, his voice hollow. "Tell me everything." They sat in the front pew like two penitents seeking absolution from an empty altar. Lorenzo hadn't put away his gun. It rested on the wooden seat between them, a Beretta 92, black and gleaming in the candlelight, a silent reminder of how quickly confession could turn to execution. But he'd holstered his rage, at least temporarily, replacing it with the cold, analytical focus that had made him the most powerful crime lord in New York. Vincent felt that focus like a scalpel against his skin. "Start from the beginning," Lorenzo said, his eyes never leaving the photograph in his hands. He'd been staring at it for 5 minutes, his thumb tracing the outline of Sienna's face with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man who'd reportedly ordered 43 murders. "And don't leave anything out. Every detail, Father. Every word she said." Vincent closed his eyes, letting himself fall back through time. "It was October 15th, 2002, he began. A Tuesday night. I was at St. Brendan's in Brooklyn, my first assignment after seminary. The storm had knocked out power in half the borough, and I was alone in the rectory, reading by candlelight." His voice grew distant, remembering. Someone started pounding on the door around 11. Desperate. Frantic. He could still hear it, the sound of fists against wood, each impact like a heartbeat racing toward death. When I opened the door, she nearly collapsed into my arms. Sienna. Vincent's throat tightened. She was wearing a blue dress, torn at the shoulder. Blood on her temple, bruises around her throat. And she was clutching this tiny baby, wrapped in a blanket, screaming from the cold and fear. Lorenzo's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. "I never touched her. Not once. Not ever." "She didn't say you did," Vincent replied quietly. "But she said your world did. Your father. Carmine." The name came out like poison. "My father did this." Vincent nodded slowly. "According to Sienna, yes. She said that night, she'd overheard a conversation between you and your father in your home office. Something about a shipment, a rival family, orders to eliminate witnesses. She said there was a woman involved, someone who'd seen too much. A civilian." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sienna told me she watched through a crack in the door as your father argued that the woman's 6-year-old daughter needed to be eliminated too. No witnesses, no exceptions. And you." "I refused." Lorenzo's voice was flat, remembering. The Calabrese situation. October 2002. Maria Calabrese had stumbled onto one of our operations at the port. She wasn't involved, just wrong place, wrong time. My father wanted her and her daughter dead. I said absolutely not. We don't touch children. We don't touch innocents. His hands fisted. We fought about it for hours. Sienna said she'd never been afraid of you before that night, Vincent continued, his heart aching with the memory of her tear-streaked face. She said she'd made peace with who you were, what you did. She'd grown up in that world. Her father was connected. She understood omerta. She knew how to look away. But hearing you argue about whether to murder a child, even though you refused, she said it was like seeing your future written in blood. She realized that Amora would grow up in a world where killing children was even a conversation someone could have. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, staring at the crucifix above the altar. "She never told me she was afraid." "She was terrified," Vincent said softly. "Terrified that one day, your father would convince you. Or that another family would target Amora to get to you. Or that she'd grow up thinking violence was normal, that death was just business." He took a shaking breath. So she ran. That night. She grabbed the baby, some cash, and she ran straight into that storm. To a priest she'd never met. To the only person she thought might help without asking questions. Vincent's voice cracked. She begged me, Lorenzo. On her knees, with that baby crying in her arms, she begged me to save them. She said if I sent her back, you'd never let her leave again. That your father would make sure of it. Lorenzo's face had gone ashen. Carmine died 6 months later. Heart attack in his sleep. If she'd just waited. She didn't know that, Vincent interrupted. She only knew she had one chance to give Amora a different life. A clean life. He met Lorenzo's eyes. And she knew you'd come after her. That you'd never stop looking. So she asked me to help her become someone else. And you agreed. The words were accusatory, sharp with buried pain. A priest, sworn to uphold family and sanctity of marriage, decided to help my wife fake her death. I agonized for hours, Vincent admitted, shame burning in his chest. I told her to go to the police, to get a restraining order, to try counseling. But she laughed, this hollow, broken sound, and said, "Father, my husband is the police. He owns half the judges in Brooklyn. There's no legal protection from the Vitoli family." He paused. She was right, wasn't she? Lorenzo didn't answer. The silence was confirmation enough. So I made a choice, Vincent continued. I emptied the parish emergency fund, $5,000. I drove to a contact I knew from my old neighborhood, someone who could produce documents quickly and quietly. By dawn, Sienna Vitoli was dead, and Sienna Morrison was born. Morrison, Lorenzo repeated slowly, his mind clearly working. She used her mother's maiden name. I gave her the car keys to my personal vehicle, a 10-year-old Honda that couldn't be traced. I drove them to the Pennsylvania border and watched them disappear. Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. And then I went back to Brooklyn and said nothing when I heard you'd found their bodies in a warehouse fire 3 days later. Lorenzo's head snapped up. What bodies? The ones your family identified, Vincent said, confused. The news reported. Dental records that my father arranged, Lorenzo interrupted, his voice hollow with realization. Bodies from the morgue, burned beyond recognition, planted in a warehouse we owned. He laughed bitterly. Carmine knew. He knew Sienna had run, and he staged their deaths to close the book. To keep me from searching. To protect the family from scandal. The revelation hung between them like a ghost. Jesus Christ, Lorenzo breathed. He let me mourn them. For 6 months before he died, he watched me destroy myself with grief, and he said nothing. His hands shook. I stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. I built my empire bigger and harder and meaner because I had nothing left to live for except revenge against a world that had taken everything from me. He looked at Vincent with eyes full of anguish. And they were alive. My wife was alive. My daughter was alive. Sienna tried to protect you from the truth, Vincent said quietly. She made me promise never to contact you, never to tell you where she'd gone. She said knowing would destroy you worse than thinking they were dead. She said, he swallowed hard. She said you'd either find them and drag them back into darkness, or you'd spend your life searching and never find peace. So she chose to let me grieve forever instead. Lorenzo's voice was raw. What kind of love is that? The sacrificial kind, Vincent replied. The kind that puts a child's future above a father's heart. Lorenzo stood abruptly, pacing in front of the altar like a caged animal. His controlled facade was cracking, revealing the man underneath, the husband, the father, the human being who'd been buried under decades of calculated cruelty. You said Sienna died 4 years ago, he said finally, stopping mid-pace. How do you know? She contacted me once, 8 years after she left. A letter forwarded through 3 addresses to make sure it couldn't be traced. Vincent pulled another envelope from his jacket, this one more recent, the paper crisp. She was sick. Stage 4 lung cancer. She wanted me to watch over Amora from a distance, to make sure she was safe. And she wanted me to give Amora the truth about her father when she turned 25. Why 25? Old enough to decide for herself whether to seek you out. Old enough to protect herself if she chose not to. Vincent handed Lorenzo the letter. Sienna never stopped loving you. Every word in that letter makes that clear. But she loved Amora more. Lorenzo read in silence, his hands trembling. Vincent watched emotions cascade across the Mafia King's face: grief, rage, longing, regret. When Lorenzo finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Where is she?" he asked hoarsely. "Where is my daughter?" Vincent took a deep breath. This was the moment of ultimate betrayal or ultimate redemption. He still wasn't sure which. "Washington, D.C., he said quietly. "Amora Morrison. She's a civil rights attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center. She prosecutes hate groups and fights for justice." He paused, letting the irony sink in. "Your daughter spends her life putting criminals behind bars." Lorenzo's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. "Of course she does. Of course." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "Sienna must have loved that. Her ultimate revenge, raising my daughter to be everything I'm not." "She raised your daughter to be good," Vincent corrected gently. "To be exactly what Sienna hoped she could be, away from your world. Amora doesn't know anything about the Vitoli family. She thinks her father died in a car accident before she was born. She thinks her mother was a schoolteacher who worked 3 jobs to put her through college." "Does she?" Lorenzo's voice broke. "Does she look like Sienna?" "She has your eyes," Vincent said softly. "But yes. She's her mother's daughter in every way that matters." Lorenzo sank back onto the pew, the letter clutched in his hands, the photograph pressed against his chest. For a long moment, he was silent, a king without a kingdom, a father without a child, a man confronting the ruins of a life built on lies. "What would you do?" Vincent asked suddenly, his voice gentle but urgent. "If you were faced with an impossible choice, protecting someone you love by telling a lie that destroys you, or telling the truth that might destroy them, which would you choose? What's more important, honesty or protection?" The question hung in the sacred space between them, unanswered. Finally, Lorenzo looked up, his pale eyes meeting Vincent's dark ones. "You're asking if I forgive you?" "No," Vincent said quietly. "I'm asking if you're going to kill me." Lorenzo was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then he picked up the Beretta, checked the chamber with practiced ease, and stood. Vincent closed his eyes, whispering a prayer. "I'm not going to kill you, Father," Lorenzo said, his voice cold and controlled once more. "Because you're going to take me to her. Tomorrow. You're going to introduce me to my daughter, and you're going to help me explain why her father is a monster who let her think he was dead for 23 years. He leaned close, his breath hot against Vincent's ear. "And if she rejects me, if she turns away or calls the police or tells me she wishes I'd actually died, then I'll kill you. Slowly. Painfully. In ways that will make you beg for God's mercy." He straightened, holstering his weapon. "But tonight, you're going to tell me everything. Every detail about Amora's life. Every birthday, every accomplishment, every moment I missed." His voice cracked. "You stole 23 years from me, priest. The least you can do is give them back in words." Vincent nodded slowly, relief and dread warring in his chest. They sat in that cathedral until dawn broke through the stained glass windows, painting them both in fractured light, a priest and a killer, bound together by truth and consequence, preparing to face the daughter who would judge them both. The flight to Washington, D.C. was 2 hours of suffocating silence. Lorenzo sat in the first-class cabin of his private jet, staring out the window at clouds that looked like cotton batting stretched across an indifferent sky. He hadn't slept. Hadn't eaten. His hands kept reaching for the photograph of Sienna and baby Amora, tracing the edges until the paper grew soft with handling. Vincent sat across from him, watching the Mafia King unravel with each passing mile. "Tell me about her first day of school," Lorenzo said suddenly, his voice hoarse from hours of questioning. They talked through the entire night, Vincent sharing every scrap of information Sienna had included in her letters, every update he'd gathered through careful, distant observation over the years. "She cried," Vincent replied softly, remembering the photo Sienna had sent when Amora was 5. Sienna wrote that Amora clung to her leg, terrified of being left alone with strangers. But by the end of the first week, she was bringing home drawings for her mother, stick figures holding hands under bright yellow sun. Her teacher said she was the kindest child in class. Always sharing crayons, always helping the other kids. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. She got that from Sienna. The kindness. "Maybe," Vincent said carefully. Or maybe she got it from a father who refused to kill a child, even when his own father demanded it. Lorenzo's eyes flashed. Don't canonize me, priest. I'm no saint. I'm not, Vincent replied. I'm just saying that goodness isn't genetic. It's chosen. Every day, in small ways and large ones. Amora chose kindness because Sienna taught her to. But the capacity for that choice, maybe that came from you. The jet began its descent into Reagan National Airport. Lorenzo stared at his reflection in the window, a man in a $3,000 suit, with blood on his hands and grief in his eyes. What if she hates me? It was the first vulnerable thing he'd said since leaving New York. Then you'll have to live with it, Vincent answered honestly. Just like I've had to live with what I did. Some choices don't get redemption, Lorenzo. Sometimes all we get is consequences. The Southern Poverty Law Center's offices occupied 3 floors of a modern building near Judiciary Square. Vincent had called ahead, using his clerical credentials to arrange a meeting under the guise of discussing a legal matter involving a parishioner. Amora's assistant had been pleasant but professional, scheduling them for 2 p.m. It was 1:47 when they entered the lobby. Lorenzo moved through the space like a predator assessing territory, noting exits, security cameras, the young receptionist who smiled warmly at Vincent's collar. He'd left his gun in the car, but Vincent knew the Mafia king was never truly unarmed. Violence was woven into his DNA, accessible at a moment's notice. Father Hayes. A voice called from the elevators. Vincent turned, and his breath caught. Amora Morrison was 25 years old and absolutely radiant. She stood 5'7" in low heels, her dark skin glowing with health and youth, her natural hair pulled back in a professional twist that showed off cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a navy pantsuit that was all business, but her smile was pure warmth, Sienna's smile, exactly as Vincent remembered it. And her eyes. God help them. Her eyes were Lorenzo's, pale grey-blue, striking against her dark complexion, intelligent and piercing. Ms. Morrison, Vincent managed, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice. Of course. Amora shook his hand firmly, then turned to Lorenzo with professional courtesy. And you are? Lorenzo seemed incapable of speech. He stared at his daughter with an expression of such naked longing that Vincent's heart ached. This close, the resemblance was undeniable. The line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head slightly when assessing strangers. This is Lorenzo Vitoli, Vincent said quietly, watching Amora's face carefully for any recognition. There was none. The name meant nothing to her. Please, come up to my office, Amora said, gesturing toward the elevator. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what legal matter brings a priest and... She glanced at Lorenzo's expensive suit. A businessman? To the SPLC. They rode the elevator in tense silence. Lorenzo's hands were fisted at his sides, trembling slightly. Vincent said a silent prayer that the man wouldn't break down before they reached the office. Amora's workspace was small but organized, law books lining built-in shelves, a desk covered in case files, photos on the wall showing her shaking hands with civil rights leaders and smiling with clients. One photograph in particular caught Lorenzo's eye, a younger Amora, maybe 16, standing beside a beautiful black woman who was clearly sick, her headscarf and thin frame telling the story of her cancer battle. Sienna. That's my mother, Amora said softly, noticing Lorenzo's stare. She passed away 4 years ago. Lung cancer. I'm sorry for your loss, Lorenzo said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Amora gestured for them to sit, settling behind her desk with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. Now, how can I help you gentlemen? Vincent and Lorenzo exchanged glances. They discussed how to approach this moment during the flight, but now that they were here, every rehearsed speech felt inadequate. Ms. Morrison, Vincent began carefully, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But I need you to listen, really listen, before you react. Amora's professional smile faded slightly. Father, you're making me nervous. 25 years ago, Vincent continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart, your mother came to my church in Brooklyn. She was fleeing a dangerous situation, trying to protect you. She asked me to help her disappear, to start a new life away from your father. Amora's brow furrowed. My father died in a car accident before I was born. At least, that's what my mother always told me. Your mother lied to you, Lorenzo said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. She lied to protect you. Because your father, he swallowed hard. Because I am not a good man, Amora. But I am your father. And I never knew you existed until last night. The color drained from Amora's face. That's not possible, she whispered. My mother wouldn't, she couldn't. Vincent pulled out the photograph, the letter, and laid them gently on her desk. Your mother's real name was Sienna Vitoli. She was married to Lorenzo when you were born. She fled because she was terrified of the world he lived in, the Vitoli crime family. Amora stared at the photograph like it was a bomb. Her hands shook as she picked it up, studying her mother's face, the baby in her arms, the date written on the back. No. No, this is insane. Look at his eyes, Vincent said softly. Then look in a mirror. Amora's gaze snapped to Lorenzo, really seeing him for the first time. Vincent watched the realization hit her like a physical blow. The identical eyes, the same facial structure, the genetic truth written in bone and blood. You're a criminal, she breathed, understanding dawning with horror. The Vitoli family. I've read about you. Racketeering, murder, drug trafficking. She stood abruptly, backing away from the desk. My mother ran from you because you're a monster. Yes, Lorenzo said simply, making no attempt to defend himself. I am all of those things. But I loved your mother more than I've ever loved anything in this world. And when she disappeared, when I thought you were both dead, I died too. I've been a walking corpse for 23 years, building an empire on the ashes of my grief. Amora's eyes filled with tears. She lied to me. My entire life was a lie. Your mother loved you, Vincent interjected urgently. Everything she did, every choice she made, was to give you a chance at a life free from violence. Look at who you became, a lawyer fighting for justice. That's what she wanted for you. That's why she ran. And you helped her. Amora turned her fury on Vincent. You're a priest. You're supposed to stand for truth. Instead, you helped her fake our deaths and let my father think we were gone forever. Do you have any idea how cruel that is? Yes, Vincent said quietly. I've carried that cruelty for 23 years. It's why I finally told him where to find you. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living a lie. Better for who? Amora demanded, tears streaming down her face. For you? So, you can feel absolved? For him. She gestured at Lorenzo. So, he can what? Claim me as his daughter? Drag me into his world of blood and corruption? I have a life, father. I have a career, friends, a purpose. And you just destroyed all of it by bringing him here. Lorenzo stood slowly, his movements careful, non-threatening. I'm not here to claim you, Amora. I'm not here to force you into my world or ask you to forgive me for sins you never knew I committed against you. His voice cracked. I'm here because you exist. Because you're alive. Because every day for 23 years, I've mourned a daughter who was breathing and growing and becoming extraordinary, and I didn't know. I couldn't protect you or guide you or watch you become this remarkable woman. He stepped closer, and Amora didn't back away, transfixed by his grief. I'm here, Lorenzo continued, his pale eyes shimmering, to tell you that I understand why your mother ran. I understand why she lied. And I understand if you never want to see me again after today. But you deserved to know the truth. You deserve to know that you have a father who, despite being exactly the monster you've spent your career putting behind bars, loves you with every corrupted piece of his soul. The silence in the office was deafening. Amora stared at Lorenzo, her chest heaving, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. Vincent could see the war raging behind those pale grey eyes, the prosecutor's instinct to reject everything this man represented, battling against something more primal. The pull of blood. The hunger for family. My mother died believing you'd never find me, Amora whispered. She made me promise at the end, made me swear I'd never go looking for my father's family. She said it would destroy me. She was probably right, Lorenzo admitted. My world destroys everything beautiful it touches. It destroyed her. It would have destroyed you. He paused. But you're already destroyed now, aren't you? Because the foundation you built your life on just crumbled beneath your feet. Amora sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Vincent wanted to comfort her but knew he'd forfeited that right. He was the architect of this pain, the priest who'd chosen to play God with other people's lives. "What do you want from me?" Amora finally asked, her voice muffled behind her hands. "Nothing," Lorenzo said. "Absolutely nothing. I want you to live the life your mother fought so hard to give you. I want you to keep fighting for justice, keep being good in a world that desperately needs it." He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on her desk. "But if you ever want to know where you came from, if you ever want to know about your mother before she became Sienna Morrison, or about the man she loved despite his darkness, call me. I'll answer. Always." He turned toward the door, and Vincent saw the effort it took, the sheer will required for Lorenzo Vitoli to walk away from his daughter. "Wait." Amora's voice stopped them both. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes, her expression raw but resolute. "I need time. I need to process this, to figure out what it means, to decide." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But I want to know. About her. About who she was before she ran. About," her voice broke, "about what she gave up to save me." Lorenzo's face transformed, hope breaking through grief like sunlight through storm clouds. "Anything. Ask me anything, and I'll tell you the truth. No more lies, Amora. I swear it." "Not today," Amora said firmly. "Today, I need you to leave. Both of you." "But..." She picked up the business card, holding it like a fragile thing. "I'll call. When I'm ready. If I'm ever ready." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. A door left ajar instead of slammed shut. Lorenzo nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." He walked out without another word, his shoulders rigid with the effort of holding himself together. Vincent started to follow, but Amora's voice stopped him. "Father Hayes." He turned, meeting her eyes, those impossible pale eyes in her mother's face. "Did you do the right thing?" she asked quietly. 23 years ago, when you helped my mother run. Was it right?" Vincent had asked himself that question 10,000 times. He'd prayed over it, agonized over it, confessed it to God in the silence of empty churches. And he still didn't know the answer. "I did what I thought was right in that moment," he said honestly. "Whether it was objectively right, whether God agrees with the choice I made, I'll find out when I face judgment. But looking at you now, at the woman you became without your father's shadow." He paused. "I think your mother would say it was worth it." Amora's expression was unreadable. "Get out, father. And pray I never decide to prosecute you for kidnapping." It wasn't a joke. Vincent left, his heart heavy with the weight of consequences finally come due. 3 months passed in silence. Father Vincent returned to St. Augustine's in Harlem, expecting police at his door or a bullet in the night. Neither came. Instead, he lived in a strange limbo, his secret finally exposed, his conscience finally clear, but the outcome still uncertain. Lorenzo Vitoli disappeared from New York entirely. The rumors spread through the underworld like wildfire. The architect had gone ghost. His lieutenants ran the day-to-day operations, but the king himself had vanished. Some said he'd been killed by a rival family. Others whispered he'd finally been arrested, held in some black site where his lawyers couldn't reach him. The truth was far simpler, and far more extraordinary. Lorenzo had gone legitimate. Vincent learned about it on a cold December morning when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He'd been getting strange calls since returning from D.C., paranoid that every ring was either the police or one of Lorenzo's men coming for revenge. But something made him pick up. Father Hayes. It was Amora's voice, cautious but not hostile. "I need to see you. Today, if possible." His heart stopped. "Of course. Where?" "St. Augustine's. I'm already in New York. I'll be there in an hour." She hung up before he could respond. Vincent spent the next 60 minutes pacing his office, praying, and preparing himself for whatever judgment she decided to deliver. When she finally appeared in the church doorway, wrapped in a burgundy coat against the December cold, he barely recognized her. She looked older. Harder. Like someone who'd spent 3 months wrestling with impossible truths. "Ms. Morrison," Vincent said, standing from the pew where he'd been waiting. "Thank you for coming." "Amora," she corrected quietly. "If we're going to do this, You should call me Amora. They sat together in the sanctuary, the same space where Vincent had counseled hundreds of troubled souls over the years. Now he was the one seeking counsel, waiting for her verdict. I hired a private investigator, Amora said without preamble. After you left, I spent 3 months having every detail of your story verified. My mother's real identity. The marriage certificate. Lorenzo's family history. The warehouse fire that supposedly killed us. She pulled out a thick folder from her bag. It all checked out. Every word you told me was true. I never lied to you, Vincent said softly. No, but my mother did. For 25 years. Amora's voice was steady, but Vincent could hear the pain underneath. I also had the investigator look into what Lorenzo's been doing for the past 3 months. She pulled out a photograph and laid it on the pew between them. It showed Lorenzo, dressed in casual clothes Vincent had never seen him wear, standing in front of a community center in the Bronx. He was surrounded by teenagers, teaching them something, his hands gesturing as he spoke. He looked different. Lighter, somehow. Almost human. He's been running youth programs, Amora explained. Teaching at-risk kids about trades, carpentry, mechanics, computer programming. Legitimate skills. Legal paths out of poverty. She pulled out more photos. He's also been systematically dismantling his criminal empire. Shutting down drug operations. Selling off illegal businesses. Severing ties with corrupt politicians and dirty cops. Vincent stared at the images, stunned. How do you know all this? Because I've been watching him. Amora's voice was thick with emotion. I told myself I was gathering evidence, preparing a case against him. But the truth is... She trailed off, wiping her eyes. The truth is I needed to see if he meant what he said. If he really loved me enough to change. And... Vincent asked gently. He's bankrupting himself, Amora whispered. His accountant told my investigator that Lorenzo's liquidating everything. Assets, properties, investments. He's funneling the money into legitimate businesses and charitable foundations. He's cooperating with federal investigators, providing testimony against his former associates in exchange for immunity. She looked up, her eyes shining. He's destroying the Vitoli Empire, father. He's tearing down everything he spent 23 years building. For me. Vincent's throat tightened. Have you contacted him? No. I wanted to talk to you first. Amora took a shaking breath. I need to understand something. When my mother came to you that night, when she was bleeding and terrified, you helped her. You broke your vows, emptied your church's funds, and committed what some would call kidnapping. Why? Vincent had asked himself this question 1,000 times. The easy answer was that he'd been young, idealistic, swept up in the drama of saving a damsel in distress. But the truth was more complicated. Because I looked at you, he said quietly. You were 5 months old, crying in your mother's arms, completely innocent. And I thought about the world you'd grow up in if I sent her back, a world where killing children was a business decision. Where violence was inheritance. Where goodness was weakness. He met her eyes. I thought about the person you could become if someone just gave you a chance. And I decided that was worth risking everything for. Even if it meant destroying my father. I wasn't trying to destroy him, Vincent said honestly. I was trying to save you. There's a difference. Amora was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she asked the question Vincent had been dreading. Do you think I should forgive him? After everything he's done, everything he's been, do I owe him forgiveness just because he's trying to change now? Vincent chose his words carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, Amora. It's a gift you give yourself. Your mother spent 23 years running from Lorenzo's past. You can spend the rest of your life running too, if that's what you need. No one would blame you. But your father has spent 23 years grieving children who were alive. And now he's spending his remaining years trying to become worthy of a daughter he may never know. Vincent's voice grew soft. That's not asking for forgiveness. That's penance. And penance, real penance, deserves witness. Amora pulled out her phone, staring at the screen for a long moment. Lorenzo's business card sat in her contacts, untouched for 3 months. My mother made me promise never to seek him out, she said quietly. But she also taught me that truth matters. That justice matters. That people deserve second chances. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. What would she want me to do, father? If she could see him now, see what is becoming, what would she want? Vincent thought of Sienna, beautiful, terrified Sienna, clutching her baby in a storm. He thought of the letter she'd written, the love that bled through every word despite the fear. She'd want you to be happy, Vincent said simply. Everything else, forgiveness, reconciliation, justice, that's between you and Lorenzo. But your happiness? That's what she died protecting. Don't throw it away out of loyalty to her pain. Amora nodded slowly, her thumb hovering over Lorenzo's number. Then she pressed call. They met on neutral ground, the National Mall in Washington, D.C., on a Sunday morning when the monument stood silent and the tourists hadn't yet arrived. Vincent came as witness, standing at a distance as father and daughter faced each other across 23 years of grief. Lorenzo looked smaller than Vincent remembered. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a simple coat. His hair had gone more silver. His face was lined with exhaustion and something that looked like peace. You came, he said when Amora approached, his voice breaking on the words. I almost didn't, Amora replied honestly. She stood 10 feet away, maintaining distance, her body language guarded. I've spent 3 months trying to figure out if you're really changing or if this is just manipulation. Another con from a career criminal. It's not a con, Lorenzo said quietly. I'm not asking you to forgive me or accept me or call me dad. I just wanted to see you again. To know you're real. To stop mourning a ghost. The investigator I hired says you've lost everything, Amora said, studying his face. Your empire, your money, your power. Was it worth it? Lorenzo's laugh was soft, genuine. You're asking if you're worth more than blood money and corruption. He shook his head in wonder. Amora, I would burn down 100 empires for 5 minutes of knowing you exist. Everything I built was ash anyway. I just didn't realize it until Father Hayes showed me your photograph. Amora's composure cracked slightly. My mother loved you. I found her journals after she died, read them for the first time last month. She wrote about you constantly, about the man you were before your father's death, before the empire consumed you. She said you were kind once. Gentle. That you wanted to go legitimate, but your family wouldn't let you. She remembered me better than I was, Lorenzo said softly. But yes. There was a version of me who wanted a different life. Your mother and I used to talk about leaving New York, starting over somewhere clean. Opening a restaurant. Maybe. Something honest. His voice grew thick. Then she got pregnant, and I thought I could protect you both while still running the family business. I thought I could keep the darkness away from you. I was wrong. So you're trying to become that man now? Amora asked. The one my mother fell in love with. I'm trying to become someone you wouldn't be ashamed to know, Lorenzo corrected. I'll never be clean, Amora. I've done things that can't be undone, hurt people who can't be brought back. But I can stop adding to the body count. I can stop poisoning the world. He took a hesitant step closer. And maybe, if I spend the rest of my life trying to do good, really good, not the performative charity that criminals do for image, maybe I can balance the scales just a little bit. Amora was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I prosecute people like you. I've spent my entire career putting men like you in prison. How am I supposed to reconcile that with, her voice broke, with wanting to know my father? You don't have to reconcile it, Lorenzo said gently. You can know me and still hate what I've done. You can accept that I'm your father while rejecting everything I represented. Blood doesn't require approval, Amora. It just is. The silence between them was heavy with possibility. Finally, Amora spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell me about her. About my mother. Before she was Sienna Morrison, before she was running, who was she? Lorenzo's face transformed with memory and love. She was the most alive person I'd ever met. She laughed with her whole body, sang off-key to the radio, and made the worst coffee in Brooklyn but refused to admit it. He smiled through his tears. She believed in me when I didn't deserve it. Saw goodness in me I'd forgotten existed. And she was brave. God, so brave. Brave enough to run when staying would have been easier. Brave enough to raise you alone. Brave enough to love a monster and leave him anyway. Amora pulled something from her pocket, a small photograph, worn soft at the edges. The same image Vincent had carried for 23 years, Sienna holding baby Amora, both of them radiant despite everything. I found this in her things, Amora said, holding it out to Lorenzo. On the back, she wrote, "Tell him I never stopped loving him. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him our daughter was worth everything." Lorenzo took the photograph with shaking hands, reading Sienna's message. When he looked up, his face was wet with tears, the first tears, Vincent suspected, that Lorenzo Vitoli had shed in 23 years. "She was right," Lorenzo whispered. "You are worth everything. You are worth everything." Amora closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps. The hug was awkward at first, stiff and uncertain, two strangers navigating the geography of familial touch. But then Amora's shoulders began to shake, and Lorenzo's arms tightened around her, and they stood there in the shadow of the Washington Monument, crying for all the years they'd lost and the impossible grace of being found. Vincent watched from a distance, his own tears falling freely. This was redemption, not the erasure of sin, but the hard, painful work of building something good from the ruins of terrible choices. After a long moment, Amora pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm not ready to have you in my life yet," she said firmly. "I need time. I need therapy. I need to figure out who I am now that everything I knew about myself has changed." "I understand," Lorenzo said, nodding. "But," Amora continued, "I want to try. Slowly. Carefully. Maybe coffee once a month. Maybe phone calls. Maybe, eventually, something that looks like family." She paused. "Can you live with that? With slow? With uncertain?" "Amora," Lorenzo said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've lived with dead for 23 years. Slow and uncertain is a miracle." She smiled then, a real smile, Sienna's smile, and Vincent saw the future unfold in that expression. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and arguments, moments where the weight of Lorenzo's past threatened to crush the fragile bridge they were building. But there would also be healing. Growth. The slow, patient work of becoming family. 6 months later, Vincent received a letter. It was written on expensive stationery, addressed in Lorenzo's precise handwriting. "Father Hayes. You were right. The truth was better than the lie, no matter how much it hurt to speak it. Amora and I have coffee every other Sunday now. She's teaching me about her work, and I'm teaching her about Sienna, the real Sienna, not the saint she became in memory. It's not comfortable, and it's not easy, but it's real. I've been asked to speak at a criminal justice reform conference next month about rehabilitation and redemption. Amora helped me write the speech. She says if I'm going to spend the rest of my life atoning, I should at least do it effectively. I know you carried the weight of your choice for 23 years. I know you believed you damned yourself by helping Sienna run. But Father, you didn't damn me, you saved my daughter. And in saving her, you saved me too. I can never give you absolution. That's between you and God. But I can give you gratitude. Thank you for being brave enough to confess. Thank you for giving me back my daughter. Thank you for believing that even monsters deserve truth. Respectfully, Lorenzo. P.S. Amora asked me to tell you that she's dropped any consideration of pressing charges. She says what you did was technically kidnapping, but effectively salvation. Her words, not mine. Though I agree with them. Vincent read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the elegant script. Then he knelt in his empty church and prayed, not for forgiveness this time, but in gratitude. He'd lived 23 years carrying the weight of an impossible choice. He'd broken his vows, deceived a father, and helped a mother steal away with a child. Canon law would call it sin. The legal system would call it crime. But God, Vincent believed, might call it love. 1 year after the confession, Vincent received an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. The address was a modest home in suburban Maryland, Lorenzo's new residence, purchased after selling off his Manhattan penthouse and Brooklyn properties. Vincent almost declined. His role in their story was finished. He'd been the catalyst, the confessor, the bridge between past and present. But surely, they didn't need him anymore. Then Amora called personally. "Father Hayes," she said, her voice warm and insistent, "you're part of this story whether you like it or not. You can't confess someone into redemption and then disappear before the happy ending. Besides," her tone grew softer, You're the only person alive who knew both my parents when they were together. I need you there. We both do. So, Vincent went. The house was small but filled with warmth, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes, the sound of jazz playing softly on a stereo, the sight of Amora and Lorenzo working side by side in the kitchen, moving around each other with a careful choreography of people learning to be family. Father Hayes. Amora greeted him with a hug that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Thank God you came. Lorenzo's been anxious all day. I have not, Lorenzo protested, but his smile betrayed him. He extended his hand to Vincent, and the priest shook it, the grip of two men who'd walked through fire together and somehow survived. Over dinner, they told stories. Lorenzo spoke about Sienna, how she'd pursued him relentlessly despite his protests that he was too dangerous for a good girl like her, how she'd slowly worn down his defenses with terrible jokes and infectious optimism. He talked about their wedding day, small and secret, just the two of them and a judge who owed his family a favor. She wore a yellow dress, Lorenzo said, his eyes distant with memory. Said white was too conventional. She wanted sunshine, even in a courthouse. He smiled at Amora. You're like her that way. Bright. Unmistakably yourself. Amora shared memories of growing up with Sienna, the way her mother had worked 3 jobs but always made time for bedtime stories, the fierce protectiveness that Amora had mistaken for anxiety, the deathbed confession that had shattered and remade her understanding of everything. She told me I had a father who'd loved me, Amora said quietly. In the hospice, 2 days before she died. She said, baby girl, your daddy loved you so much he would have burned down the world to keep you safe. That's why we had to run. Because his love was too dangerous for a child to carry. She looked at Lorenzo. I thought she was delirious from the medication. I never imagined that she was telling you the truth, Lorenzo finished. That I really would have burned down the world. You did, Vincent said softly. You burned down your empire. That counts. The conversation turned lighter then. Talk of Amora's recent cases, Lorenzo's community center expansion, plans for Christmas. It was ordinary and extraordinary, the mundane miracle of family gathering around a table. As the evening wound down and Vincent prepared to leave, Lorenzo walked him to the door. I never thanked you properly, Lorenzo said. For having the courage to confess. For believing I deserved to know the truth. You would have found out eventually, Vincent replied. Sienna's letter specified that Amora be told on her 25th birthday. I just accelerated the timeline. No, Lorenzo said firmly. You didn't just tell me where to find my daughter. You gave me a chance to become someone worthy of knowing her. If you'd told me a year earlier, 5 years earlier, I wouldn't have been ready. I would have tried to drag her into my world instead of building myself up to hers. He paused. Your timing was perfect. Maybe divinely inspired. Vincent smiled. I'd like to think so. Though I'm not sure God approves of my methods. Then God and I have something in common, Lorenzo said with dark humor. Questionable methods, but effective results. They shook hands once more, and Vincent descended the porch steps into the cold November night. But before he reached his car, Amora's voice called out. Father Hayes, wait. She ran down the steps, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. In her hands was a small wrapped box. We got you something, she said, pressing it into his hands. Open it. Inside was a photograph in a simple silver frame. It showed the 3 of them from earlier that evening, Lorenzo, Amora, and Vincent, standing together in the kitchen, mid-laugh at some joke. They looked like family. Like people who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. On the back, in Amora's neat handwriting. The truth will set you free. John 8 verse 32. Thank you for believing in freedom, even when it cost you everything. With love and gratitude. Amora and Lorenzo. Vincent's vision blurred with tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you both. He drove back to Harlem with the photograph on his passenger seat, catching glimpses of it at every stoplight. When he finally reached St. Augustine's, he placed it on his desk, right next to his Bible and his mother's crucifix. For 23 years, he'd carried the weight of his choice in silence and shadow. Now, finally, he could carry it in light. The confession had been his act of courage. The redemption had been grace. And the family rebuilt from ruins and truth. That was nothing short of a miracle. 2 years after Father Vincent's confession, The community center in the Bronx held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for its newest expansion, a legal clinic offering free services to families caught in the criminal justice system. The clinic was named the Sienna Morrison Vitoli Justice Center. Amora cut the ribbon alongside her father, both of them beaming for the cameras. Behind them stood dozens of young people Lorenzo had mentored, several of whom were now enrolled in college or trade programs, building legitimate futures. Also in attendance was Father Vincent Hayes, who'd been asked to deliver the opening blessing. "We gather today," Vincent said to the assembled crowd, his voice strong and clear, "not to celebrate perfection, but to honor the hard, painful work of transformation. This center stands as proof that no past is too dark to overcome, no sin too great to be redeemed through action and love." He looked at Lorenzo and Amora, standing side by side, father and daughter, criminal and prosecutor, darkness and light learning to coexist. "The truth," Vincent concluded, "is often painful to speak and harder to hear. But it's also the only foundation strong enough to build real change upon. May this center be a place where truth is spoken, where justice is pursued, and where families torn apart by violence find their way back to each other." The crowd applauded. Lorenzo met Vincent's eyes across the gathered people and mouthed two words: "Thank you." Vincent nodded, his heart full. He'd spent 3 decades as a priest, hearing confessions and offering absolution. But it had taken one impossible confession, made not to him, but by him, to finally understand the transformative power of truth spoken in courage and received in grace. Some sins required confession to God, but others required confession to the people we'd wronged. And sometimes, if grace was generous and courage was sufficient, those confessions didn't end in condemnation. They ended in redemption. They ended in family. They ended, against all odds and expectations, in love. This story explores the complex intersections of faith, family, justice, and redemption. Father Vincent's choice 23 years ago was morally ambiguous. He violated his vows and separated a father from his child, yet he arguably saved Amora from a life of violence and corruption. The question at the heart of this narrative is one we all face in different forms. When does protecting someone justify lying to someone else? And can truth spoken decades late still bring healing? Lorenzo Vitoli's transformation wasn't instantaneous or easy. Real redemption never is. But his willingness to dismantle everything he'd built to become worthy of his daughter represents the kind of radical change that's possible when love outweighs pride. Amora's journey, from anger to understanding to tentative reconciliation, reflects the messy reality of forgiveness. She didn't absolve her father instantly, nor did she reject him completely. She chose the harder path, gradual relationship building with clear boundaries. And Father Vincent discovered that sometimes the most courageous act of faith isn't keeping a secret. It's finally telling the truth, even when the consequences are terrifying. May we all have the courage to confess our truths, the grace to receive others' confessions, and the wisdom to know that redemption is always possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Thanks for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.